and I was wondering, is a good mirror object lesson would be like we are the matrix and they're in the real world of some sort.
Yes, yes.
And so that means many more people can fall from the real world.
Oh, yeah. Let's go back to it. Paul says, women must dress modestly and cover their heads in the worship times because of the angels. Now, what Paul means, which is what I believe, is that it harkens back to the angels looking on the women and finding them beautiful and taking wives. There are, I think, some versions that actually speak about tempting the angels. You can't tempt those who are very fallen. I mean, this is about more possibly falling, and there's constant reference to they are watching us. So there's a testimony that we are giving in terms of that. And again, like I know this is not nominal Christian gospel telling, but am I wrong? That's the question. I mean, if Jesus is going to reconcile everything, and if all of that gets put in place, and if there's a judgment coming, and if we're going to judge angels, and if angels still form part of judgment in Revelation, that they bring judgment, then that tells me that there's a lot going on between our dimension and there's interaction. We know there's interaction. So we can't have our version of the events being too, how can I say, simplistic, if that makes sense. Am I making sense? Is there any other thoughts, any other questions on that?
Yeah, I
Well,
think I like Nandi's explanation about the alternate, that we think we are the core of everything, and yet there is what is existing in the heavenlies with God, what created, pre-existed us and our creation and our being born as mankind.
Right.
Then it puts it all into perspective that there's a bigger agenda going down and there's more things, and the free will and free nature of those heavenly beings, as you say, Darren.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee that the rebellion could stop, and it's frightening to think that, and you think of the consequences of what that, and does that mean that closer to the time of the Antichrist that more will defect, or is that just pie in the sky? I don't know.
Any other thoughts?
um, there was a thought of how God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Um, I've forgotten what my train of thought was now. Sorry, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, look, I think, Kathy, with that, the principle just in general, in any case, of the hardening of the heart, it's never God instituting the beginning of that. It's the person, it's the being themselves that gets that going. And there's obviously a point of no return. Now, God, in his omniscience, can know when there's no more hope. And if there's no more hope, then all God needs to do is bring it to its end. You know,
Yes, and also I think talking about angels. I mean, I could easily have just said an angel hid me, but it could have been just that God shielded me from being seen when I was being
no,
chased.
look, Kathy, in that case, in your story's case, I'm telling you 100% sure that was an angel that was sent for that exact purpose.
Yeah,
That's
I think. Yeah.
that's for sure, because that's what they do.
Yeah.
Probably more often than we care to realize. So I think we'd probably be very grateful when we find out how many times our lives have been saved that way. Or so that definitely happens, and that's kind of my point, Kathy, is that we have interaction with them more than we realize. And that's okay. It's meant to be that way. That's the way it's designed to be. Um, you know, you got to remember too, they know that we are made in God's image too. So they have a vested interest in that as workers for God, as lovers of God. I mean, can you imagine that the angels love the gospel, even if they aren't recipients of it? They would love it because it's from their God. They would love it from the perspective of they've watched God's word become flesh. You know, that's a vested interest for them. They don't have to be direct recipients of it the way we are in order for them to have an appreciation and a love of it either. You know, and those are important things to realize in that situation. And by the same kind of energy, but to a negative extent, you got to remember that the kingdom of darkness, on the flip side, the rebels, celestial rebels, as I think I referred to them in my book, Strange Gospel, they're having the opposite effect again. You know, it's driving them in the complete opposite direction with the same kind of intensity. And so you've got these warring factions, these two opposite sides of the same coin kind of thing. And the point is here again is that, yeah, the gospel is bigger than we think. And that's kind of the point of the Strange Gospel book that I wrote. It's to start getting that conversation, you know, into the air, to start speaking about it. And it doesn't have to change Jesus. It doesn't change him. But it's very naive to think that it's always just been about us. Because you know what that does? That diminishes Jesus. It actually makes him smaller. I mean, those angels who wanted to come and help Jesus, that cared for him after the wilderness testing. Do you know how intense the heavenly host must have been holding their breath, proverbial breath? They are watching one Son of God be tested either directly by the other true Son of God who fell, or by some high-ranking, powerful, influential, demonic, supernatural being who could have toppled another Son of God. You do realize that, huh? You do realize if it wasn't possible for Jesus to fail, then the test itself was not a real test.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And that brings into understanding our freedom of choice as well.
Right. So this is the important thing. And again, you see, Kathy, that if we in our eager, zealous love for Jesus, which is fine to have, automatically have him winning the wilderness experience because he's God, you actually aren't doing Jesus justice. You're doing quite the opposite.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you're actually implying that he couldn't fail. And if he couldn't fail, then it's a rigged test. I mean,
Absolutely.
you know, this is why I say to people, it makes no sense to congratulate a genius on an achievement in what they are genius in, because they never worked for it. There's a lot of times people will be wowed by something I say or do, create Kathy, even you, and I appreciate it. Like Kathy, when you appreciate the work I do, the graphics I do, and the teaching, the way I can put it all together. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate your kind words, I really do. But in all honesty, Kathy, it's not very hard work. Yes, it takes a bit of time, but it's probably not as much hard work for me as it would be for other people who might try too. So in that sense, what I'm implying, I've got an unfair advantage. It's so watch here. You take someone who doesn't have graphic capability and who hasn't got my mental capacity, I guess. if they achieve what I achieve, their achievement is much greater because they actually had to work hard. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. Understand that.
Which I'll tell you honestly, Kathy, even at school sometimes and around Nande, I mean, there's Nande. Yeah, I'm going to use Nande as an example. Nande, when we play Risk, the board game that we love playing, we're going to play it tomorrow. There's a lot of people, Nande will know this already, and Ina, if she's listening to, knows this. Every now and then there's people who don't want to play Risk against me because they think I'm too good at it. And I am. I am very good at it. And the crazy part is, Kathy, again, I honestly don't even have to work hard at being that good. I just get it. I can think across a whole lot of different ways, watching everyone's game, memorize what they're doing and see where it's not hard work for me. It probably would be hard work for other people, but it's not for me. So again, the question is, what is the value of congratulating me every time I win a Risk game? Is there high value on it? There shouldn't really be. Because I've not incredibly exerted my mind in order to achieve that, if that makes sense. And this is my point with Jesus. He did have to work in that situation, because if he didn't have to work in that wilderness, then it wasn't a great achievement. If it was as simple as God, who is perfect, acting perfectly, then it's just cheating, actually.
So deep.
Yeah.
A good. So just I'm getting this properly. Besides for us humans, because Jesus obviously was also human, not having an excuse, he kind of was also saying if and when, I guess maybe even you can put it as a when, any other fallen son of God, any other son of God falls, they won't have an excuse because of what Jesus did during his time on earth.
Right. It could in its own way then be a form of condemnation on them too. So far from
the humility that he had.
Yeah. So far from him, his achievement wasn't a means of salvation for them. It rather was a means of condemnation for them, while simultaneously being a means of salvation for us. You could probably put it that way.
Yes, that makes sense.
And further evidence of that is that Paul says, or is it Peter, that says, we will judge the angels. That wasn't the original plan. Which proves things have gotten so distorted that the lesser can now judge the greater.
But in saying that, Darren, the opposition of being the judges of the greater, which was before, is in no way to be attributed to our own
No.
efforts or achievements. Once again, it all comes back to Messiah and his total unselfishness.
That's it. And it all comes to God's glory. And that's always what the point is going to be. And what is it that Satan looked for? Glory that wasn't his. So again, I think I can say this. I think we're seeing our gospel is getting bigger again, which I'm thrilled that it's getting to be, because you know why it thrills me? It's making Jesus bigger. And it's showing the greatness of God too. It's showing how much more amazingly great they are. And that's what I think our job is. Okay, so the prototypes for Messiah. Now, we've already mentioned this. I've already mentioned Nimrod and Jesus to some extent. So we're going to look a little bit into just one example, and there's more than one example of this, but I'm just going to give you an example to show you that every step of the way too, The kingdom of darkness is mimicking quite pathetically or distorting quite intentionally what is the true original design for what holiness and anointing was supposed to mean. So a little bit about Nimrod's history. Nimrod's fire. This is a bit sick and unfortunate, but I'm going to keep it as simple as I can. One of the first depictions of, and obviously the mythologies get mixed up and it's very difficult to untangle them perfectly. But one of the first gods that gets mentioned of demonic proportions and evil is Baal. Um, yeah, there's other names that gets used too. The most basic depiction of it would have been like a half man, half goat type of being, or bull sometimes, head, upper torso, with a chimera, which is half human, half animal, which is a whole thing on its own, of course, that we know from Nephilim theory, that would have an oven built into the lap of the statue, with the arms stretched out, and would receive human sacrifice, babies, kids. And they would actually, for the sake of the parents, do a few things like cover. The kids would be lined up, I think stripped naked and lined up, but covered then with sheets. And there'd be loud drums playing and emotional whipping up, so that when these kids were being burnt alive, not only could the parents not necessarily see their kids when their child exactly died, but also the drumming and the frenzied music and dancing would drown out their screams too. That's what I'm referring to when I say Nimrod's fire. Now, the other thing about Nimrod's fire is that it's well attested to in some of the ancient cultures that fire was introduced, and other kind of elements like this was introduced by the gods that came down, which also shows you why these fire features so prominently, like supernatural. That's why there's a walking on coals and all of that in occultism. It's because of its obviously what it is able to do, and it's a false sense of light. There's that too, of course. It battles the darkness, so to speak, if you want to see it that way. Now, just imagine the story I've just told you about Nimrod and the sacrifices of the babies. Can you better understand why Abraham might be an atheist in his day? Not so hard to see it, eh? Told you for years I have been of the opinion that Abraham kind of becomes an atheist of sorts in his day based on the decrepit practices of child sacrifice, that his father was an agent of, as an idol maker, again according to Jewish midrash, directly, in fact, remember as Nande pointed out, that Nimrod's father, Abraham's father was the right-hand man of Nimrod, and was supposedly the idol maker in that too. So when you put all those stories together, you know, it starts painting a dangerous picture. So you got with Nimrod these false sense of light and these things that he does, and the sacrifice that gets looked for. Now remember, with Nimrod's picture, your children are being sacrificed. So that's his action as a figure of status, right? As the anti. What does Jesus do? Well, two things. Firstly, Jesus is the light. He claims to be the light of God. He brings clarity. What Jesus does brings clarity, and he reveals himself, right? Not concealing, he reveals himself. Now, if you look at Nimrod's fire and the picture of the sacrifice there, look what Jesus does. He becomes that sacrifice himself. He lays his own life down. So I hope you can see the contrast there again. Nimrod would have received those kids as sacrifices. It's part of what he would have encouraged, where Jesus instead welcomes kids. So I hope you get the point there. It's just another comparison that's worth making. And then there's this, 2 Corinthians 11 verse 14, Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. He can appear something he's not. He can fabricate. He was that, but he's not that anymore. So when he does it now, he's a liar. He's a false, he's a fraud. And he does it. And that's what's so dangerous, is that he can do it. Next point, let's do another comparison. I've already now given you the picture of the possible connection. Nimrod gets sacrifices, Jesus sacrifices himself, lays down his life. Okay, sacrifice. What happens to their respective bodies? Nimrod and Jesus. Now let's go back to the mythology. In mythological terms, and I believe this probably really happened, Nimrod was killed by, yeah, I've got to think now.
Shem, I think it's Shem.
Yeah, it was. Was it? Is it Shem? Yeah, I think
Yeah, it is.
it is probably Shem. Yes, which, and Shem obviously being the prototype of Israel, the forefather of Israel and the people of the Middle East. Shem supposedly cuts Nimrod's body into 12 different portions, or many portions, and sends them around the known world because of the evil that is being done in the name of Nimrod. Now, what's interesting is, in Egyptian mythology, this is what ends up happening to Osiris. His body gets cut up into all these pieces. So what it shows you is that something originally happens, and then it becomes myth and carries on in succeeding generations. So Nimrod's body gets cut up, but in Nimrod's case, his body gets cut up. Okay, well, I guess it is a form of judgment. That is what it was. It was a form of judgment. And here's the other thing. Nimrod, remember now, Semiramis is his wife, and she was a temple prostitute, and she ends up having a baby who she then claims is the reincarnated Nimrod. In other words, he was killed, but he comes back to life. There's another one of your false pictures of what the anti-Messiah will do. Because clearly what happens later with Jesus' body also gets broken. But in his case, he obviously says, eat, this is my body broken for you. And he passes, hypothetically speaking, metaphorically speaking, his body around. He also gets resurrected. So you can see these connections between these two stories and what happens with their bodies. Judgment, again, for Jesus, his body was broken as a sign of judgment. So there's that point is really there. Now I just wanted to show you on this topic again of the Messiah and coming. Remember, the idea of Messiah is to save and all of that, and that's a very prevalent and important theme. Now, we spoke very briefly about the alien thing, and I don't want to go deep into this, but I want to show you how it's getting set up as a possible thing that's coming. Listen to this from the Roman Catholic Church. In that regard, Jesuit astronomer Guy Consol Magno, I always struggle to say his name, I'm reading about him in a book now, has written, listen to this, just listen to this one. Any aliens we find will learn and change from contact with us, just as we will learn and change from contact with them. It's inevitable, and listen to this last part, and they'll be evangelizing us too. This is a Jesuit priest. This is from Catholicism. This guy is like the right-hand man to the Pope in terms of certain sciences and so on. He's talking on behalf of the Pope and the Catholic Church. Aliens we find will learn and change with contact with us, and we'll change with them. It's inevitable, and they'll evangelize us too. This guy's also said he's ready to baptize them. This is the official statement of the Catholic Church, by the way, on that topic. Okay, here's another one from the same book that I'm reading. They have an interview with a guy that's been in contact with some, not aliens, but been in contact with some high-ranking government officials. He's into, I don't know, he's kind of like, I want to say, a journalist of sorts of occultism, and obviously is respected enough to have been given information and approached and engaged with people. So he's talking here about the CEs. Now the CEs he speaks of as a group of people here on Earth, normal people who are kind of watchmen of some kind, government, religiously connected, trying to keep control of things. It's very complicated. But here's what he says. Their beliefs that the UFO phenomenon is 100% real, but that its origin is satanic. As they see it, the aliens are visiting us. That angle is a camouflage to allow Satan. And now remember, this guy's not saved. So he's going to say, if he really exists, of course, because he doesn't, this red phone, this guy that's been quoted here doesn't necessarily believe in religion, is of course to get his grip into us. They believe that the presence of the UFO phenomenon right now and since 1947 is the commencement of an end time scenario where the ET landing angle may be played out to con the world into believing the Greys, that's type of aliens, are friendly extraterrestrials. The CE believes that belief and prayer rather than weapons can hold off this infiltration and invasion. My point is just to show you how real this is. This is how openly it gets spoken about. And again, you got to ask yourself, what's the point of this alien story? What is the angle on that at all? And I think this is the last quote I've got here that I wanted to show. Now, the father of ufology, or that study. Now, I've got to give you a background here. The US from the 1920s and a little bit further on had covert operations that were researching alien abduction claims and sightings and all of that. Obviously, this was done hush hush. It was under more than one name. It was most popularized when it was called Project Blue Book. Now, in America, as other countries have a classified, and then after a period of time, by law, the documents have to be declassified. So I don't know exactly when, but some of the documents from the Air Force in America was declassified, and it could now be spoken about. And Project Blue Book was therefore uncovered. Now, Dr. J. Alan Heineck was a astronomer, that very well respected man during this time, and was called in by the Air Force as a debunker. His job was to come in and to prove everyone that was seeing aliens or having these experience abductions to be calling them basically nuts. He was literally employed for that purpose. And at the start of it, he acted like a good scientist must, which is to be skeptical, which he was, which is right. He should be. That's the right way to be. And he's the one, actually, if you know as you heard me use say the term close encounters of the first kind, close encounters of the second, the third, the fourth, it's Dr. Heineck that created that classification system. He's literally the creator of that system. I'm reading the 2 books that he wrote after he was done with their work with the Air Force. And here's the interesting thing. Dr. Heineck went from being a skeptic, working with the US Air Force, to actually being a believer. Now, when I say believer, again, in UFOs, he didn't classify them as aliens or as demons or anything. He just knew they exist. And he had serious disagreements with the US Air Force. In fact, his books were released not in America. His books were released through Britain. And I can tell you now, I don't think the American military and that were too thrilled about that. But anyway, I've got both of them and I'm reading them, and absolutely, I don't know what I'm enjoying more. It's he's just almost like reading his diary on his experience, or if it's just the scientific genius and clean and neat way that he handles data, how he scientifically discusses what he found when he spoke to, because he tells you about the stories of the people he interviewed, and he tells you the thing is, these people are not nuts. He looks at them at what did they have to gain out of it, and were they looking for money, and are they trusted by the community and all of that. And he says the point is, yeah, these people are risking the entire credibility. If they were lying about this, they were throwing their life away. The point is these were genuine things. What these people are claiming was happening to them did in fact happen. Now his contemporary, that's why I'm telling you this, you'll see at the end of my quote here, Dr. Jacques Vallée, he was the contemporary with Dr. Heineck. Also not religious, also not directly a believer in any way. So keep that in mind when you hear this. I believe there is a machinery of mass manipulation beyond the UFO phenomenon. It aims at social and political goals by diverting attention from some human problems and providing a potential release for tensions caused by others. The UFO contactees are part of that machinery. They are helping to create a new form of belief, expectation of actual contact among larger parts of the public. In turn, this expectation makes millions of people hope for the imminent realization of that age-old dream. Watch that word he uses here, salvation from above. Surrender to greater power of some wise navigators of the cosmos. They may be from outer space, but their methods are those of deception. So there you see, he's telling you the summary of what this UFO agenda is going to achieve. And what is that? Salvation from above. Is that not the idea of a Messiah? That's what it is. Even he knows it as a scientist. That's what he's suggesting with that statement. Okay, hide and see. Here's the other thing, the idea of occultism is hiding versus what gets shown. And that's why I've chosen to show you here, just contrast again, the Messiah versus the anti-Messiah agenda here. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants the things that must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John. There's the interaction again with angels. And here's the point, there's revelation. It's being shown.